things with air. You're using air to interrupt these in a way that destroys the mycelial network without destroying the tree's underlying root network, if you will. But that said, once armillaria is big and established in a tree, it's a little bit like trying to close the barn door after the horse is out. It's not really all that effective. And there is nothing you're going to apply to that tree. Now, we're talking about one disease on one oak. So there are a lot of fungicides in particular that people will often use to try and treat various different maladies. Propiconazole is one of the big ones that's popular right now. Propiconazole is a systemic fungicide. I'm not going to be able to tell you in every instance where it's better or worse, but let's think about this. You're applying a systemic fungicide to an organism that relies on mycorrhizal networks in order to really thrive and survive. I liken it, like any analogy, it breaks down, but I liken it to taking antibiotics. You have a gut flora that you rely on to survive and process food. If you take antibiotics, you're screwing that up. And that's not helping you, although it may be a lot better than the streptococcus that's chewing up your arm or whatever you're taking it for. So the only time I can think of that that systemic fungicides in general would be warranted is when you really know that you have a very dire situation and you've sat down and considered the costs to the plant. And there may be instances where those kinds of things are warranted, but it's not sort of a thing like you say, oh gee, my plant's sick, let's throw some propiconazole on it and see if it gets better. That's sort of the bass-ackwards way of going about problem solving.
I can add to what we've done sometimes.
It's funny, I've heard people speculate armillaria is a way for oak trees to kill off competition, but anyway. We've had some pretty good luck with phosphoric acid treatments on Phytophthora, but we're talking about Cinnamomii down there. Thank God in San Diego we don't get enough rainfall to really support the sod down there. I was very reluctant to use it, but it was reported that it had no ill effect on mycorrhizal fungi, and we actually have brought some trees back by using it as either a bark penetrant treatment or as a agrifos is what it's called, or a cambium injection, pretty well knocking out the apparent Phytophthora, and also really good with anthracnose on sycamore. So they have that problem up here?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's been incredibly effective with sycamores doing it at the right time, just as buds are swelling. So we have had good luck with that. It doesn't appear to be, I'm always nervous about putting phosphorus around mycorrhizae, but that's usually endomycorrhizae. And if it's ecto, I don't know that it's such a big problem. So.
Okay, now we have a question about another type of list. We've heard about fire-resistant or non-fire-resistant plant lists. We do have lists of pollinator plants. I know that Gordon Frankie's group from UC Berkeley has done a lot with those. What about carbon sequestration plant lists? Does anybody, can anybody talk about that?
Well, we did talk a little bit about redwood trees, and they are carbon sequestration heroes. So if you want to plant or help replant redwoods in appropriate places, I'm not sure that San Diego would be one, but they they take the cake. And then there are other trees, locust trees are big carbon sequestration giants, and there's something called the empress tree, which some people consider to be an invasive, but it grows really quickly, and because it grows super quickly, it it absorbs a ton of carbon as it's growing. So if you think of growing trees like growing teenage boys, perhaps, They just inhale a lot of food to reach that growth spurt.
How about smaller stuff?
I haven't studied the literature on the smaller stuff, I just, on the trees.
To one degree, I mean, trees are carbon. The bigger the tree is, the more carbon you're sequestering. The faster it grows, the more carbon you're sequestering. So almost by definition, smaller trees sequester less carbon. Now, that gets a little bit iffy in some places, because one of the things you don't really see is how big that plant is underground. So there are some, say, perennial grasses in California that can have remarkably good carbon profiles, despite the fact that they don't look like all that much above ground. So I don't know of a good plant list. The problem being, of course, that most of the plant lists you could generate are very sort of location specific. We can't even generate one for California because you can't grow redwoods in San Diego. Well, you can try and grow redwoods in San Diego.
Plant it in the middle of the lawn.
Right. But as soon as we move inland, or as soon as we move too far north or too far south, the plant palette changes. So I think that's going to hamper developing plant lists that are widely applicable in California. Although looks like Laura has something to contribute on this.
Well, I guess what I would ask is, do all plants sequester an equal amount of carbon for their scale? I mean, redwoods are the biggest, so yes, of course they do the most. But is each plant processing and storing the same amount of carbon for its size?
So do I need to repeat that for the?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is, do all plants sequester the same amount of carbon for their size?
Yes.
And the answer to that is no. If you like Bermuda grass or corn, this is your place, because the C4 plants are going to sequester carbon at much higher rates, particularly under warmer and warmer environmental conditions. So that's something that people are going to be looking at in the future. Just for there are different kinds of plants, but one kind of photosynthesis or metabolic process, we should say, is called C4, which is Bermuda grass and corn and a few of these other monocot species, as opposed to C3, which is almost every other plant in the world. The C4s tend to be adapted to tropical climates and hot weather, and they're much more efficient at carbon dioxide capture pound for pound. So that gives them a competitive advantage, and that's one of the reasons Bermuda grass is so hard to eradicate. But I'm babbling on too long. Did you have a question?
I had a comment.
Okay, please.
Yes, so I was just going to reframe the question a little bit and say, how can I have the biggest impact on this planet? And I would say that at the end of the day, global warming is huge, and I would make a side pitch and say, like, the t-shirt I'm wearing is from the League of Conservation Voters, which is a super PAC, which works on the elections to identify politicians which are the most anti-global warming. And and look at your investments, and also go green in investments in your 401ks, wherever you can. So that was a side pitch.
Yes, we are going to get to some more complex questions in a minute, but we have a set of questions.
Could we take this a little bit, could we talk about this a little bit more? Because doesn't some of the carbon sequestration have to do with the root depth, that you're actually storing the carbon not in the up?
Right, and I think that's what Steve was saying, the native
So the
grasses.
native
So,
grasses, that's the
some of the common native bunch grasses that are sold and being used in landscaping a lot.
But
For
probably
example,
not
California.
just grasses.
Huh?
It's probably not just grasses, I think just root depth in general, it would
Well-
be a characteristic to consider.
Yeah, that's
the
true.
question.
That's true. Well, there is a question that's very similar to that, and that's there's a set of questions about ground covers, which I think actually bring in some of these different questions, or different aspects. So we know that we're trying to break the fuel ladder. We know there's some areas where we're going to have definitely low vegetation. So there's interest here in ground covers that will be good at carbon sequestration, ground covers that will be good for pollinators. What other benefits can we get from using particular kinds of ground covers?
What other?
That are not lawns.
Do you want to know what benefits we can have from growing ground covers?
And I think which ones?
Which
native
ones?
ground covers?
Which native ground covers
Sequester more
are?
carbon?
And will also be good for pollinators.
Okay. And be fire
What are the best ground covers? Yeah, I mean, I don't know, the low-growing ceanothus is one that's coming to mind.
Well, there's some native ground covers like the beach strawberry and
Beach strawberry,
that's a good one.
yeah.
There's some native Argentinopolis that
Argis-
stay well.
Yeah, right. We were just talking about that right before getting on the panel. Like, what are some good plants for this? Maybe I should.
Some of the coyote brush.
Brush.
That's what we were thinking.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's Arctostaphylos. And then there's, come on, I just said it. Buckwheat, thank you.
Buckwheat, yes.
Harry Hognam.
And so don't forget what was mentioned earlier, that when you have a ground cover, then you are cooling the ambient temperature, right? And you're also retaining the moisture in the system, which is going to, by definition, lessen the fire danger and so forth. So this idea of hydrating your landscape and keeping it hydrated